Thank you for reaching out. It's great to catch up.
Oh yeah, same. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, so it sounds like this project is just a deeply personal. So many things are going on in this album. It has to be a cathartic release for you.
Yeah, it's a little strange, frankly, because it was actually, initially recorded back in 2022,
Yeah.
and so I my joke is that it's the last COVID album, which I'm sure is not true, but um, yeah. So I recorded it a while ago, and then there's just been a lot going on before and after that. I had a second child. I, moved back to Kansas City from New York, where I lived for 8 years.
Yeah.
Moved back home to Kansas City. I got a doctorate. There's just been a lot going on in these times, and so, I recorded this album, and I recorded it maybe like a month before I started my doctorate, a couple months before I had my second kid, and so I think I maybe overestimated how much time both of those things were going to take, for better or for worse. And so it just kind of sat around. And, anytime you have an album that just sits around, you sort of go through phases where you think this is good, or you start to think, oh man, I wish I could have another crack at this or this.
Yeah.
And so that makes it worse, at least for me as an anxious person. I start overthinking things a little bit. And so, anyways, as the years kind of piled up, I was like, man, I got to get this out. And so I finally got it mixed with Joseph Bransford, who helped me a lot getting it all done. And so, yeah, it's been great. It's actually been fun to share these tunes because now they're kind of old. These tunes are all
Yeah.
4 years old or so, 5 years, some of them. And so it's been very fun to actually, get them out there and have people responding to them positively. It's been nice. Yeah.
So the official release is December 5.
So that's a quote that I first read. It's from the film director Ingmar Bergman, who is this iconic film director, and I heard it from his daughter initially. She said it in this interview, and there's this book by an author named Austin Kleon saying "Show Your Work,"
Yeah.
and he wrote about it in that book first. And so then I went looking for this quote because it was really resonated with me, especially over the pandemic, in the early months when we were all, we had just moved back to Kansas City a few months before the pandemic. So we were
Yeah.
trying to get situated into our new home. And, we had a 4 month old baby when we moved back. And so we were trying to figure all of this out and adjusting just to living, from New York to Kansas City is no joke. It's a very different situation. And so, anyways, the quote really resonated with me, Demons Hate Fresh Air. And especially during, the craziest days of lockdown, I feel like the sort of reprieve of going for walks and just getting outside the house, obviously in the springtime, was really meaningful and something that was really important as I tried to sort of, disassociate it, pandemic and moving feelings and all these things, we also moved back. We moved back just a few months after my first album, Hazel, came out.
Yeah.
And so that felt like a real sort of release point, kind of all the work that I had done up to that point in New York and as a musician and as a composer. It all led to that moment. And then suddenly there was this few month period where we moved back home and then we were living in this new place with a new child and then the pandemic and all these things sort of piled on top of one another. And it felt a little bit like, getting out of the house the one time a day or two times a day we could, taking those walks, my wife and I with our child, and trying to sort of process what was happening in the world was really important and just fed into all this music that came out of this project in this time. It really feels kind of like a basement record
Yeah.
of me. I'm in my basement right now, as you can see. This is my little studio space, and everything just kind of came from just having this time alone and reaching around and trying not to go a little crazy while doing it, I guess.
Yeah. The one thing that's interesting about you talking about doing this during COVID, I remember I interviewed more than I ever did before during COVID. And as much as people didn't want to release albums during that time, I felt like there was something special about that era. That was going to be a COVID release, COVID era release. And now that you have this, it was in the can for 3 years. What does it feel like to have traveled so far down the road and to come back to that and now it's a release? What's that feeling like?
Well, it's just I think for every I can't speak for everybody obviously, and not to, a lot of people had terrible things happen during that time, which we did not, thankfully. But that time felt particularly surreal, and it felt particularly like a little it's sort of still hard to think about because it feels like there was this what's the word? Like a time suck. Like suddenly there was all this time missing that is just sort of in my brain I still can't process. You know, we've
Yeah,
lived in Kansas City now for I think coming up on 7 years. Is that possible? And it just feels like that can't be possible. And that's because we had this little at least year and a half, 2 year period in the middle that just sort of like, existed in like a time loop, almost like, like Groundhog Day or something. And so I think that just puts people in a funny place where you really need to be inspired. You really need something to keep you going, you know?
yeah,
And I think for a lot of musicians, there was this moment where I don't know how long, maybe a month into the process, maybe 6 weeks into it, where you think, what is the point of this? What
yeah,
is the point of making music? With the idea of like, hopefully someday we get to do this with other folks again,
uh-huh,
hopefully we get to be in the same room. And, for me, I had that feeling like intensely because I was, also we had just moved back and I was just, my first gig was like back in Kansas City was supposed to happen the first week that the lockdown happened.
yeah.
And so like I didn't even get to play with folks when I got back here really. And and then the pandemic happens, and yeah, it was just it's that feeling of like of needing something, needing to be inspired. And so actually to get this music now, going from my basement to taking it to other musicians, that on its own was already so weird and cathartic. It just
Yeah.
felt so good to have other people play this music that I just kind of imagined for it was a year and a half on my own, and then to actually now like get it out there more and get it released, and then kind of look in the rearview mirror. It still feels a little. It feels a little surreal. It feels a little bit like a dream.
I remember during that time too, the longer it went on, the more I kept thinking, is this ever going to come back? Like, we all knew it would, but
Sure.
especially as a musician, that would have had to have been harrowing to think, this is my lifeblood. This is what I do. This is a part of breathing every day. To not know when that's going to come back. Because as humans, since we're children, we're given timelines. You have young children, they have a timeline. This is
Sure.
when the video games happen. This is when food happens. This is
For
when you go
sure.
to bed. And we're conditioned. But with this, it was like, well, we'll see what happens, you know?
I was digging up an old email from it was from my boss at the music school I taught at in New York. And literally, this is like 2 days ago. And it was from like the first month of lockdown. And I was just like, hey, how are you all doing? Just one of those emails. And he was like, we are super locked down. 20% of our students are still taking lessons online. Hopefully by April we'll be done. It was one of those things where you think hopefully in a month you'll be done. And then
Uh-huh.
now to see the full scope of it is just like it was just a completely obviously different thing. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think not know, and then obviously all these institutions, musical institutions, had to shut down or adjust, or in some ways it didn't come back. In lots of ways, music came back now, and it feels mostly normal, I would say. But there are obviously, I mean, not to mention like some of the musicians that we lost during that time, but clubs and all these things. It was definitely different, I think, when it did come back. And so yeah, I think not knowing, especially because people used to always tell me, like when I was in high school, we had some clinician come in and be like, you should only do music if it's the only thing you can do. Because it's just, it's not easy. There's lots of other things you can do, and you got to love it. You got to want it and need it. And like, it's got to be in your being, I think, to keep going sometimes. And so that was sort of the first time, I think, in my life where there was suddenly like, there was like this thing that I've kind of given so much to and put in the hours and like really care about so much was suddenly just kind of like maybe it's not going to be there
Yeah.
anymore. And what does that mean to you as a person and as a human being? And I can only speak for myself, but it was a little, yeah, it was surreal and just sort of confusing. Yeah.
I remember a PR guy at one point telling me CDs are going to go away. And as
Mm,
much as people rely more on digital, CDs are a cornerstone of the jazz lexicon. It's the hard copy of choice. And
Sure.
I was like, there's no way that that's going to go away. So I think there was a lot of things as we were all getting into this antiseptic mindset where these things are going to go away, but they were all instrumental, to who we are as a community to kind of promote all of this. I mean, that's how you make your money live. It's still something people want signed. There's just things that I'm glad stayed intact during that time.
Yeah, for sure. And like I think overall, I think that it is mostly came back, which is just it's sort of like again, I think it speaks to these folks like you, these folks that are like really pushing this music and doing it like are doing it because they love it. And that doesn't go, I think even in those darkest days or whatever, that was still there. And so, I mean, I remember watching like those Village Vanguard live streams,
Yeah,
from my like living room and it's like it's not the same thing as being there, but like it gets you something. That's just
yeah,
something to keep you going. And so, yeah, I think they're, like obviously we're not dealing with music like the way that Taylor Swift deals with music. The people that are doing this are doing it because they love to do it and want to keep it alive.
yeah.
So I think CDs is definitely like it's all just, feeds into that for sure.
So the one part of this process of this album is that you did this migration from the epicenter of jazz in New York and you come to Kansas City. You've gone through all these things, sobriety, parenthood, the move, all of these things. So my question to you is this: how much has Kansas City been a part of your artistic growth and healing?
I mean, so much. It's Kansas. It was when we moved back from New York. Obviously, living in New York for 8 years and playing music and putting an album out while living in New York, and you get sort of accustomed. So many of my friends in the scene are all like some of the best musicians playing today. And I think there's no sort of escaping that. Like New York is still the epicenter of jazz music. But I always knew in my back pocket, that Kansas City was full of incredible musicians. I think people don't quite understand that all the time, but Kansas City has a really, really excellent jazz scene, especially a straight ahead jazz scene. But there's lots of folks like Eddie Moore and EMAS that are doing free jazz stuff. There's folks all over the place that are doing interesting, creative music here in the same way that they were doing it in New York or in Brooklyn or wherever. And so when I was so excited to move back because I have a lot of friends that I sort of didn't get to play with as much as I would have liked to when I was living in New York. And so again, I had that first gig scheduled for the first week of lockdown, and I was so excited. I was like, "This is great! I get to play with so many old friends." And I started meeting new folks even in those couple months that I was here, and then obviously again, pandemic, and so post-pandemic when we actually started playing music, which was on our drummer Brian Seaver's back patio. Like that was the first place I had played music in a year or 18 months or whatever. And um, it was so cathartic to get to play not only just music in general, but also with these folks that I had been so excited to play with, and especially to get them to play my music.
Yeah,
And so the process of actually, literally playing on his porch, like literally bringing music stands, and I sort of like forced them to play my music because those were just sessions where we would just like play standards or whatever. Everyone's just excited to be with other people, frankly. But I just had this like deep need of like, can you play my music, please? Can we just play one tune? They were like, yeah, they were great. And so through that process of actually, once it sort of became safe again to get into rooms and start working through this music and figuring out how we were going to take it from basically basement solo sketches on drum machines and synths and guitars to actually a jazz trio. It sort of felt a little bit like I was slowly kind of yeah, being like healed.
yeah,
Like learning how to play. So, and part of this whole process too was learning how to, Kansas City is a very different music scene than New York.
yeah,
And so, obviously like I have a point of view as a composer and as a saxophonist. I feel, the music that I write is a certain way, but I also am not trying to completely like run over everybody in town. Like I want to try to bend my music to these folks too. I want them to bring their voice to my music. And how can we kind of find this ground together? Because I always think that's the most interesting music, when
Yeah.
it's not so uh, solo oriented or stubborn or something. And so that was part of the process too. Of I had to figure out which of my tunes worked for these folks, what they responded to, and so, yeah, we worked on the music for a while with Brian and Ben, and trying to find the best way for them to be themselves in this music. And I don't know if they would actually. I'm sure they're like still think that I'm stubborn and like have my ways with this stuff. But I do think we found a really nice path. I think of like figuring out ways that could honor everybody's voice that everyone was excited about. Which is I think something that I really desire and need when I have people play my music.
So the one thing that's interesting about Kansas City during the pandemic is that clubs didn't close. They closed in New York, they closed in LA, there was other places, and I was always astonished when the dust settled that the Green Lady and all of these places were still around. So my lead in with saying that is this. What has been the most surprising thing? You come back here from New York, which is the epicenter of jazz. You come into a place that isn't necessarily a destination point, but it's becoming a destination point. What has been some of the most surprising elements of being in this scene, watching it grow, and becoming more of a part of it? What's been great about that?
I mean, the quality of the musicians are just, I'm still sort of blown away. There's just so many folks that are just like so great that people nationally just don't have any idea about. Um, and so, like I think the hardest thing for people that make music that I make in Kansas City is that there aren't that many places that are like listening rooms. Like a lot of the places like Green Lady and stuff like
Yeah,
that. It's a different, and those places are great, but it's a whole different vibe. And so my music, with synthesizers and stuff like, that wouldn't fly at Green Lady, which is fine. It shouldn't fly. It doesn't make any sense there.
yeah.
And so it's been interesting to like find the places, but the way that I found the places to play my music has been through the people, which is not that uncommon, but just from playing with other people, finding like-minded people, and just kind of like, sitting in with folks and just doing that. And again, it sort of leads back to just so many of these musicians and composers are just so fantastic, like Marcus Lewis and Eddie Moore, like I said earlier, and all these drummers and Brad Cox is obviously an amazing composer. There's just so many folks around that are just doing, really special music that aren't getting that much love on a national scene. And so, it's sort of like those were a lot of names that I knew, but I didn't fully, I think, process and appreciate how good some of those people were, until I was back playing with them all the time. And so, and there's a lot of reasons why people would live here instead of New York, cost being a big one.
Yeah.
Um, and so, again, they're not getting the exposure as some of these other folks, but that's, I think they could totally go live in New York and hang and do all that stuff, at least from what I saw when I was there. So,
Yeah. So with the title like Demons Hate Fresh Air, the cover is very whimsical. There's a crayon, there's a whimsical nature. How did you land on that?
so we tried a lot of different things. Demons Hate Fresh Air is kind of intense in a way, like just the text of it. And my initial idea was that we were going to kind of make it intense, but I really wanted it to be, earthy. Like that was the kind of word I kept using. Like on Hazel, we had all this sort of like it was sort of inspired by this graphic novel and sci-fi stuff. And so a lot of the artwork was like spacey and gold. And this is like I wanted it to be earthy. And so we were kind of messing with stuff and we had all these different ideas and and my daughter Alice, who is now 6, was we Brendan Culp, who does all my artwork, who's like one of my best friends. We played in a band in high school together. Uh we still like we just do, most things together. We have all the same influences mostly, I would say. Um, and so he, is now an artist primarily. He came up with the drawing first, but he didn't show me because he kept sort of pushing me to be like, I think Alice should do something. And so him and Alice, like when he comes over, him and Alice will do little scribbles, like artwork stuff together all the time. And so we were trying a bunch of different stuff with Alice just to kind of see. And one day she got her chalkboard out and she started writing the letters. And Brendan was like, "Oh, this is totally the title of the album." And then he showed me the artwork that he did, and they just matched perfectly, you
Yeah,
know? And so, and then he was able to incorporate the colors, which is why it looks like crayon instead of chalk now.
yeah,
And so yeah, it was, it's a little face with kind of flowery and like it has these colors, but my daughter wrote the name Demons Hate Fresh Air, and then on the back of the CD, she wrote all the song titles on her chalkboard. Um, and so yeah, it's just, it's supposed to be Demons Hate Fresh Air, even though it can sound intense. I think it's hopefully like a little like optimistic,
yeah.
and so that's the idea behind all of it. So
Right on. So December 5 is the release. How can people, I know Bandcamp, it's out on Bandcamp. What about release dates? Any other places to get it? Any other formats it's going to be in?
yeah, so on December 5th, it'll be everywhere but Spotify.
Okay.
So you'll be able to get it. You can download it on iTunes. Obviously, Bandcamp is the best place, but and then you can stream it on Apple Music or any of those other streaming services except for Spotify. We have a CD release, which will come, that comes out on December 5th as well, which is nice. It's a very limited number. Um, and so, yeah, that's the primary place where you'll be able to find the music. And we've also been releasing videos for a lot of the songs,
Okay.
which are on YouTube and on Instagram. So the Instagram is Wingwalker Music, and so if you go, you can see some of the video we shot of us performing some of the songs. That incorporates the artwork and my daughter's handwriting and stuff. They
Cool.
turned out really great. I'm really happy with
Yeah, I
those.
love it. Yeah, it's
Thank-
whimsical. It's fun. I love it. Drew, so great to catch up with you, man. Thank you for taking a minute out to talk about the album and Kansas City and everything in between. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.